You can almost hear it in the silence combines parked in endless rows, cornfields untouched, grain silos full to the brim with a crop no one wants. From Iowa to Indiana, the heart of American agriculture is breaking. Not just financially, but structurally, strategically, and globally. Because here's the brutal truth. America is no longer the world's corn superpower. Canada is. And it didn't happen in a war or a massive trade deal. It happened quietly, methodically, and devastatingly fast. While U.S. farmers were praying for subsidies and waiting on ships that never came, Canada was sealing billion-dollar corn deals with Japan, South Korea, and the EU, turning red maple leaves into gold. So how did we lose the crown? And can the U.S. ever claw it back before an entire farming civilization collapses? Let's break it down. It's not just bad luck, it's systemic breakdown. U.S. corn prices have crashed to $3.50 a bushel, far below break-even for most farmers. In Cedar Rapids this week, the cash bid for September delivery sits at just $3.74. That's devastating when your input costs per acre now average over $165 in Iowa. Why so cheap? First, demand. China, the world's second-largest corn importer, halted U.S. soybean and corn orders months before the latest tariff escalation. A massive blow. Then came a domestic gut punch. The USDA canceled local food programs supporting schools, tribes, and food banks contracts that used to support small farmers. And finally, over 2 million tons of corn were rejected by global buyers and sent back to the port of New Orleans. Contracts worth millions shredded into worthless paper. Importers didn't want it, couldn't ship it, or were penalized for trying. Tariffs hit the system like a sledgehammer. After the White House imposed steep fees, up to $1.5 million per trip on Chinese-built cargo vessels, Gulf of Mexico shipping costs spiked by 25%. Across the industry, export expenses soared by $930 million per year. Meanwhile, container rates from Asia doubled. It now costs nearly $5,000 per few just to send grain across the Pacific. And that's not even the worst of it. In March 2025, the Federal Grain Inspection Service raised the cost of pesticide residue testing from $57 to $81 per sample, a 40% jump. Without this certificate, U.S. corn can be rejected mid-ocean. Farmers are paying more to prove they're clean, but still getting turned away. In February, large traffic on the Mississippi dropped 16% compared to the 5-year average. New Orleans was backed up with over 180 vessels at anchor. Ships can't load, corn gets wet. Farmers lose another 27 cents per bushel just waiting. But even if you could ship it, would the world buy it? Not anymore. Global buyers are rewriting their standards. It's no longer just about price. It's about green, clean, and traceable. Mexico banned GMO corn. European and Asian feed mills followed suit, demanding blockchain traceability and low-carbon certification. That's a death blow for America, where 92% of corn acreage is genetically modified. The U.S. is getting erased from the white lists, while Canada is getting invited to the top table. Why? Because they saw this coming. Canada's Prairie Trace system tracks corn from seed to silo. Every container gets a blockchain certificate, verifying no GMO, no glyphosate, and a low-carbon footprint that clears EU customs 20 days faster than U.S. grain. This green label isn't a niche anymore. It's the standard. And the numbers prove it. In Manitoba, Canadian corn is fetching $4.20 per bushel, while U.S. corn sits below $3.50. The grain farmers of Ontario report a premium of $1.30 to $1.87 per bushel above Chicago Board of Trade futures, up to 30% higher. Even new crop corn is commanding a 15 to 20% premium. That's unheard of. And it's not just Asia and Europe buying, it's happening inside North America too. In March 2025, Canada signed the CSKOAA, an organic equivalency deal with South Korea. Within weeks, Ontario co-ops secured a 5-year supply contract with one of Asia's biggest feed mill groups. Meanwhile, Saskatchewan leveraged the weak Canadian dollar and the US-EU tariff war to strike new deals with Japan and the Netherlands for non-GMO corn. U.S. exporters shut out. A domino effect? Now the pain is spreading. Reuters reports unsold corn stocks in the U.S. are at a 6-year high, over 2.5 billion bushels, or 68 million tons. Baking in silos. Iowa farmers are selling combines on Craigslist. In Indiana, rural school districts have moved to 3-day school weeks to save electricity. In Nebraska, irrigation allocations were cut so low that co-ops stopped accepting grain to avoid overflow. Small towns are hollowing out. In Hastings, diners close at 6 p.m. for lack of customers. Gas stations sit empty. It's what one local paper called a zombie economy. The buildings are there, but cash flow is dead. The ethanol industry isn't helping. With corn prices low and demand drying up, ethanol plants are closing. In Columbus, Nebraska, Valero shut down 60% of night shifts, laying off 120 workers. Corn demand is falling, and with it, everything else tied to it. The psychological toll is enormous. Some households are withholding up to 90% of their harvest because selling now guarantees a loss. The Indiana Economic Council says the local economy shrank 6.1% in Q1 2025, one of the steepest drops in the country. Food aid requests are flooding in. The Food Bank of Indiana reports a 50% increase year over year. SNAP cuts could eliminate 133 million meals for the rural poor. And it's not just about hunger, it's about dignity. Farmers who once fed the world are now facing foreclosure. What makes this collapse more terrifying is how Canada has institutionalized its grain advantage. Ottawa didn't just chase deals, they built an infrastructure. Export Development Canada, EDC, gives farmers single-lot export insurance and reimburses up to 50% of cold chain costs. Their export platform meets the EU's RED II carbon tracking rules, a standard the U.S. hasn't even begun to implement. The result? Faster customs clearance, fewer rejections, higher premiums. And U.S. importers are noticing. Reuters says they're starting to bypass Gulf ports and ship through Vancouver instead. Canada's rail grid runs deep into the Midwest, and when empty, containers return from Asia. They offer cheap backhaul rates, making Canadian grain cheaper to ship than American. And here's the cruel irony. America isn't just losing corn, it's about to lose soy, beef, and dairy too. Because every link in the U.S. agri-chain is tied to dirty GMO corn. If corn fails, the rest falls like dominoes. Seed Europe has already blacklisted U.S. soybeans for carbon and GMO concerns. The beef industry is next. American cattle raised on high carbon feed face new tariffs from both the EU and Asia. Canada and Australia, both pledging net zero meat by 2030, are now seen as safer suppliers. Even milk prices are under pressure as feed costs soar and dairy co-ops warn of widespread bankruptcies. So what now? Washington faces a binary choice. Option 1, hit the brakes on protectionism. Cut tariffs on green equipment. Embrace global traceability standards. Accept low-carbon rules. And get back to the bargaining table. Yes, it will cost political capital, but it might save the rural economy. Option 2, double down. Keep tariffs high. Keep inspections opaque. Subsidize failure. That's the road the Rust Belt took 3 decades ago. It ended in ghost towns and forgotten promises. And if Washington stays the course today, Canada won't just take market share. They'll own the narrative. They'll be the gold standard of sustainable agriculture, the Swiss watch of global grain. The decision is urgent. The longer America waits, the more towns it loses. The corn crisis isn't just an economic downturn. It's a full-blown systemic collapse. And while Canada redefines the global food chain, America is watching its farming empire sink into debt, doubt, and dust. The question now isn't whether the U.S. can compete on price. It's whether it's even allowed in the room anymore. So, what will it be, Washington? Will you act before the final silo is full? Or will the Corn Belt become the next Dust Bowl?